Good morning, folks. Thanks very much for joining us again, and our lovely ladies, our Pendle team, with Karen, Shelley and Joe. Just a wee quick 2-second word before I hand you over to them. Just again, if you didn't see last night, we've done the triple live at Stubcross Caverns, and our wee brave soldier down the bottom there, Joe, was stuck, was put into a dark cell. The lights were turned off, the door was shut. She's done really well, and the Calvin. So if you missed it, go to Facebook or YouTube and give it a look. So that's me finished. So I'll hand you over to our lovely Pendle team for more of our forgotten Pendle. Ladies.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
So just as Scott said, good morning. We're really delighted to be back with you again. And tonight, so I keep saying tonight because it's usually night time that we do this. So this morning we're going to be talking about Janet Preston. Now, Janet Preston, what makes her different from the rest is she wasn't tried at Lancaster Castle. She was tried in York because she come from a place called Gisborne. Put my teeth in. Gisborne in Yorkshire. So much so she features in the book The Yorkshire Witches. Now, just talking of books, I know that the lovely lady Karen has wrote a book touching on Janet and her kind of experience, because she wasn't so much connected with the Pendle witches. She was more the Salisbury witches. That's right, isn't it, ladies?
No.
Oh.
No, she wasn't connected with the Salisbury witches.
Okay.
She was connected with the Pendle witches through Malkin Tower meeting.
I think it was connected to the Salisbury witches. Grace, is that right?
That's Grace Sowerbuck, yes. Yeah.
See, there you go, Shelley. There you go. So, but she was connected, like Karen says, with the Malkin Tower meeting. Now, she wasn't always known as Preston. She was married on the 10th of May, 1587, to a chap called William Preston. Hence her name, Janet Preston, was then changed by marriage. She was, would we call her a housekeeper? Would she have been a housekeeper to the Listers?
She was a retainer of some sort, and I think the same age as the Thomas Lister Senior, so quite possibly.
Oh, okay.
So there's obviously a very connection there. So yes, quite possibly.
And they were quite fond of each other, just, monogamous, but they were quite fond of each other. They got on quite well, I do believe. So do you want to tell us a little bit, Karen, about what the tale of Janet Preston? Yes.
Well, as you say, she was born in Gisborne, which, whilst that is now in Lancashire, it's between Skipton and Clitheroe. Back then, it was in Yorkshire, so she was taken to York Castle for trial for witchcraft. Not once, but twice.
Oh.
So that kind of sets her apart a little bit. And it just shows how determined Thomas Lister Jr. was to get rid of her. There's obviously something had happened in that family, and we don't know what. So for her first trial, Thomas Lister the Younger accused her of causing loss to his goods and castle by witchcraft. She wasn't tried for that. She was charged with the killing of a child of one Dodgson's. And that's really all that we know about that trial. There's a really great research book is The Lancashire Witch Craze by Jonathan Lumby. And he's done some research and put the Dodgsons as living in Bolton by Bowland, which is just next door to Gibson. But she was found innocent. So on about 6th, 7th of April, somewhere around there. And if she'd have stopped there and just kept herself to herself, she might have been all right. But she didn't, because 3 days after escaping or leaving York Castle, she went to Malkin Tower. Oh. Now, the reason why, we don't know. So it was the gathering. There was Elizabeth, James and Janet Davis. There also a lot of other the Pendle, which this is where it all came to. And I wonder if she was one of the big catalysts in all of this, because Thomas Lister was clearly absolutely dead set on having her tried for witchcraft or tried as a witch.
Can I just ask, Karen? So can I just ask a wee question? Was she let off because she accused all the other ones?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that had come into it at all, because what had been happening in Pendle, she was already in York Castle dungeon, so she didn't really have known anything about it.
Oh, right. Yep.
And at that point, it was only Alistair Davis and Demdike and Chattox who were incarcerated at Lancaster Castle until the Malkin Tower meeting. That's when everything blew up.
Yeah. Right.
And it was always the other way around. Sorry, Joe.
No, it's okay, Karen. So I'm guessing with you saying that 4 days later, she then went to Malkin Tower for the Good Friday meeting. She was held in what would have been the Lent Assizes then in York.
She was, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So the assize happened 4 times a year. So Lent, summer, autumn, winter. So I mean, it's rough correlation to the rent days, the quarter days for paying rent, and the judge would travel around the north. There was a circuit, so they go to York, they do a few others, go to Kendal, down to Lancaster. So it's very much a circuit. So it's the same judges that have tried Janet Preston at York, who then tried the Pendle Witches at Lancaster.
I think it was I could be mistaken, but it was Bromley. Bromley tried.
And James Altham, the two of them, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think Bromley was in charge of the Lent Assizes at York. So he dismissed the charges against Janet Preston.
Mm-hmm.
Then when we come back round to the summer assizes, it was James Altham who was in charge at York who convicted Janet Preston. And Bromley, who then tried the Pendle Witches at Lancaster.
He was a close associate with the fella, the Bannister, wasn't he? So she
Nicholas Bannister, yes.
Yeah.
She basically had no chance then.
So that they all knew each other extremely well. There was a lot of intermarriages, a lot of them were kin, and as the judges travelled the circuit, they would stay at the various halls and manors of the magistrates, etc. So the relationship between Roger Knoll, Thomas Lister, and the judges would have been very close. They would have been regarded as, yeah, absolutely. So picking up the story, James Davis then identified Janet Preston as at the Malkin Tower meeting. Yeah. And there were 3 things happening at that Malkin Tower meeting. There was the naming of the spirit for Anne Davis. There was blowing up Lancaster Castle to free Demdike and Chattox, and was to kill Thomas Lister the Younger and his uncle Leonard Lister because of what he'd done to Janet Preston at the Lent Assizes by charging her with witchcraft. Yeah. So she was rearrested by Roger Knoll very soon after, as Joe says, probably about only a few days after the Malkin Tower. So she wasn't for very long. She would then have been held at Reed Hall for about a month before she was carted back off to York Castle and that horrible dungeon there. Now the dungeons that
I feel quite compelled to her, really, as this.
Yeah.
She went to them for help, and at her time of need, where they were all, as we know, they were all kept together at the Well Tower. She was completely on her own.
Was on her own, yes. Yeah.
So we talk about the mental state that they must have been in the Well Tower, to understand her mental state.
Yeah. At least in the Well Tower, they had family and friends, and in the case of Demdike and Chattox, deadly enemies as well together. Yeah. But yes, Janet Preston, she was on her own and carted off to the other side of Yorkshire.
So that we talk about the relationship between the Listers and Preston. So we talk about this relationship. Yes. Now, Karen, I've noticed when you were talking that it comes across that the son wasn't as fond of her as his father was.
No. So that raises questions. Was his father too fond of Janet Preston? Were they having an affair? Or did he force her in some way? Because it's very, or did she accuse him of forcing her and that's why Younger took against him? Or were they having an affair again? why the younger would take against him. It does show, though, that Janet's husband, William, he stood by her through both trials, as did the family and the kin from Gisborne, which doesn't stack up with having an affair.
No.
But then
No.
again, as we talked to it, she was his retainer, so she would have been powerless. So it's weighing it up. We'll never know. We'll never know. But she obviously caused big ruptions within that family.
Uh-huh. So the Listers lived at Westby Hall, and I do believe that still stands to this day.
Yes.
I do believe.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
But from what I found out, when Thomas Lister became ill, he wasn't quite as fond of her, and perhaps in his disillusional state, and it's quoted that he would chant, "Janet Preston is in this house. Look where she is. Take hold of her for God's sake. Shut the doors and take her. She cannot escape away. Look about for her and lay hold on her, for she is in this house."
Yes.
Did he fear her, or was he just?
Certainly sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And he also accused her, as he died, he accused her of witching him to death.
Yeah, I think Janet Preston lays heavy upon me. Help me, help me.
Yes, because although Justin was arrested for the second time at Morecambe Tower, she was tried for the murder of Thomas Lister Sr. 4 years previously. So it wasn't straight away, it was 4 years ago. So why that she wasn't charged with that the first time she was tried, I don't know. But the death of Thomas Lister Sr. is quite tragic, because he fell with a massive seizure at Thomas Lister the Younger's wedding. So 1 minute, everyone was there, Roger Knoll, all the local magistrates, all the local lords, sirs, everything would have been there. And Thomas Lister Jr. was marrying the daughter of Thomas Haber, who prosecuted Janet Preston in the second trial. So they're all very interlinked.
Oh, okay.
And it would have been a great celebration. Thomas Lister Jr. would only have been young, 16, 18. Father fell, seizures, carried settle, and that's where he started ranting about Janet Preston. So a day of great celebration turned to a great day of fear and grieving. And I think he lasted about a week, but not long. Yeah, so very tragic. So that would have made a big impression.
Yeah, massive.
And the name on his father's lips as he was ill and in extremis and dying was that of Janet Preston, not alive. So again, was he accusing Janet Preston? Was he declaring love for Janet Preston? Was he apologising, confessing about something he'd done to Janet Preston? But whatever, it was Janet Preston was on his mind most definitely. And that by accusing her on his deathbed, that was taken as evidence, and that was believed as proof. And then there was even firmer proof, because once he had died, when he was ready for laying out on with the winding sheet, she supposedly touched him and his corpse bled fresh. And we know that's impossible, but that was absolute proof of murder. Even King James himself has that written down as proof of murder. And murderers would run rather than being forced to touch a corpse, because they knew that would be enough to convict them. And also, interestingly, the third point at the trial was that the Morecambe Tower meeting was also used as firm proof and evidence that she was a witch, murdered him by witchcraft. Even though trials of that hadn't yet happened, it was still taken as proof. The poor woman had no choice.
James Device claimed in court that he heard Janet Device curse the Judge John Noel.
I think it was Thomas Lister the younger that they were cursing, along with his uncle. So that was at Malkin Tower.
Yeah.
Yes, they were supposedly to curse him because she couldn't do it on her own. They needed the power of all of them
Of
to be
a
able to
coven.
curse of the coven, yes, to curse them to death, and that they would then meet a year hence at Janet Preston's house.
Mhm.
So the same coven, so presumably on Good Friday again. It clearly held some significance for them, as it did for both Catholic and Protestants. So that was a day of big mourning, and yet they were feasting on beef and ale and stolen mutton
Yeah.
and practicing witchcraft, supposedly.
Oh yeah, I mean let's talk a little bit about this meeting at Malkin Tower. Now, I totally agree with the three theories that you have. I also think that maybe there was a fourth one in the mix, that we know
Right.
that there was such a big thing about religion and how you were forced into the belief of the king.
Yes.
So a little
Yeah.
bit like the kind of rules that we've all had to follow now regarding the lockdown and the whole coronavirus thing. We've been issued with a law. We've all got to comply with it, and if you don't, there was going to be consequences. However, a little bit different to 1612, because 1612, if you didn't comply with being Protestant, you'd be hung.
Yes.
Now you just whacked with a fine. Sorry, I've got they're just having a bit of a squabble over some charms on my bed. So looking at that, we know that were they Protestant or were they Catholic? Was the fourth reason for the meeting maybe a rebellion against? Because this is when poor old paranoid King James I decided to slap everybody with this. If you're going to prove to me that you're a loyal servant to me, and God save the king, you're all going to go to church, and everybody in the whole of the country is going to go on Good Friday.
Yes.
Everybody's going to go.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They didn't. And the ruling was, he didn't care if you were on your deathbed. You were to get somebody to carry you to church. Every single person had to be in church. And even if you couldn't read or write, there was somebody at the door that was eligible and would take the names of everybody that came. But this tiny little church in Newchurch, and these whispers grew louder and louder and louder about, well, they're usually standing there and they're not. She's usually over there and they're not. There's a whole family missing. And two of them were already, locked up in York dungeons for witchcraft. Were they just, do you know what, fingers up to you, king, and fingers up to your religion. This is what we believe in, and this is what we're going to do. But the thing that gets me with that is she came all the way from York.
Well, she came from Gisborne.
Yeah,
because she was at home in Gisborne, so it wasn't too far away.
right.
So it's not too far from Clitheroe, but it's still a fair trek, and on Good Friday as well. I wonder if she was going to them to tell them what it was like, to tell them about the trials, to try and prepare them, to support them, to help them in some way.
Oh, okay.
Which is possible, to give them as much information as possible, and to connect, really, and tell them of her experiences.
Yeah,
and also,
side.
You make a very good point about Good Friday and being in church. There'd always been laws about recusants and about having to be in church, but before that Good Friday, there'd been an edict by King James I that everybody must attend, and they would be dealt with very, very severely if they did not attend. So all the lords and the knights would know this. Roger Nowell would have had a edict from the king and would have spread it out to all of his contemporaries, all of his peers. But the peasants wouldn't have known that something had changed.
No, not at all. And maybe they kept the ones that they needed to place a blame on in the dark for this, as it would be a perfect.
Quite possibly.
We don't need to tell them they need to be in church. Don't say a word to them. They don't turn up, because they never turn up anyway. Except this Good Friday is crucial to them being there, and they're not.
Yeah, because they would have told all their contemporaries, and then And the magistrates, the lords, they were, as the families were all kin, they were all intermarried in some shape, way, form. The further I research, the more connections there are. So that they all knew. So anybody who was of the Catholic persuasion, they would have had the nod from the brother, their uncle, the son, the father. They'd have been there. So they would have been protected in some way, because they know if they weren't there, they would have been up at the assizes. They would have been fined and possibly more. And they were northern folk. They were tight with them. They weren't going to be paying fines to the king. All they had to do was just go to that church. They could do their own service themselves at home, or possibly even with one of the local priests who were in hiding. But the peasant folk, who was going to warn them? They didn't turn up. That was on their head, and they so yeah, they would have had no warning, no nothing. They would not have known that something had changed.
No.
And they were just doing what they normally would. They were observing Easter, Good Friday in their own ways, but they couldn't do that anymore.
No.
A perfect excuse to cart them all off, because the fact that their names were not on the list of those who'd attended, that would have been enough. They couldn't prove they were at church, so they must have been up to treasonous behaviour.
Because we know if we talk about the four likely possibilities, as to being the first one, they say it was the naming of the familiar that would belong to Alison Device.
Yeah.
Well, if this was the case, this couldn't have happened.
No.
For the sole reason she wasn't there.
She wasn't there, but it may still have been planned. It may have been planned, and that was why they had the feast.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, it was only literally a few days before, or a week or two before, that she'd been carted off to Lancaster jail.
Yeah.
And then Demdike and Chattox were carted off to Lancaster jail. So then just the purpose of the gathering, I think, would have changed, and they would have all been in shock.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, the second reasoning being, let's get together and throw everything into the pot and blow the gates off Lancaster Castle and free them.
Yeah.
What do you think, Shelley? What do you think on that one? Do you think that they thought that they were powerful enough to do something like that?
I generally don't think they were even contemplating it, to be honest. I mean, they probably would love to have thought they could have done that, but I don't generally think that they had the means, the money, the power to even, or even maybe the brains to go through with it. I mean, really, they would have to have some magical powers to be able to go through with something like that, the same as what happened in the gunpowder plot, really. I think it's a bit kind of far-fetched for anybody, but again, there's two sides to every story, isn't there? There's the one side, well, I just turned up, we were just celebrating the fact that I got out, we were talking about the ones that were still in jail, and what was going to happen to them, and I was just joking when I said Thomas Lister, I was just joking when I said Thomas Lister. I didn't mean that, but obviously back in the days, if they weren't conforming to the religious views, the magistrates and stuff like that, of the law, then basically they're just going to get told everything, you're doing this. And then obviously with all the people saying, well, I heard them saying that, they were there, they said this and they said that. See the expression, the expression people use nowadays that children will get you hung. That is just so relevant to that situation back in the day. And I'm waffling on a wee bit here, but I'm quite a big believer in and midwives, words, the way they say that. And I really do think now that's what that saying stems back from. It's so easy for a kid to say, I heard them saying this, I heard them saying that. And back in the day, that would just have been taken as gospel, especially since children were allowed to obviously evidence and but again, I generally can't see that was a thing, that they were going to blow up the Lancaster jail. Was there no thing that they said they were going to blow up something else as well? It wasn't just a Lancaster jail, there was something else. Is that right? I'm not quite sure.
It was, I think it
were going to stop at Lancaster Jail. I'm pretty
And they were
sure.
going to kill the jailer, Thomas Cavell, as well.
Yeah.
With it.
Yeah.
I think because the gunpowder treason had been a few years beforehand, there were links to the north, to both Lancashire and Yorkshire. Lancashire was known as being a place where Catholicism still thrived. And it's interesting that Thomas Potts' account of the trials were dedicated to Sir Thomas Knivett, who was the one who foiled the gunpowder treason. So it was very much on the minds. And I do find it interesting that a supposed coven of witches were going to blow up a castle. Wouldn't they could murder by witchcraft and affect people and like that? Why would they blow up? That would be fear of the magistrates and the jailer. I agree with you, Shelley. I can quite agree, especially after rail and feasting. And in dark times, we make jokes. It's how we cope with the dark times, the dark humour. I can quite believe there'd be a joke about it, and that heard by children, misunderstood,
and of course,
and then the magistrates pouncing on that.
Aye, these people were still religious. They might not have believed in they can be a Protestant or whatever, but they still had their religious values. You know, they just had to date in secret. And they would have resented these people for making them out to be somebody they weren't, and for them to die as a result. So of course they would have been angry. Of course they would have been saying things. But like us nowadays, we can literally say, "Oh, see him," and just off the back say something in a kind of person manner. But it would never be classed as witchcraft nowadays. It's just a normal term of phrase sometimes, you know, whereas back then obviously it wasn't.
I don't know, some of the things I say might be borderline.
Sorry.
Well, you know.
Your ritual be falling off that wall again, Jo.
Don't. I've had to prop her up with a broomstick, and she's never fallen off that one. It'll be just my luck, you know, that something happens, and I wake up, she's at the bottom of my bed or something like that. Yeah, I don't mind. They're all friendly. If anybody comes into the room, they're not going to come down and get us. I'll have to put a picture on the group of my three. I call them my three Pendle witches. So just going back briefly, Karen, we spoke earlier about you have a book that you have written.
I do. Thank you. Yes, Murder by Witchcraft.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about that? Can we have the blurb on the back?
Yes. Well, the Pendle witches have fascinated me, and I'm working on the main Pendle witch trial at the moment. But Janet Preston and also the Samlesbury witches often get left out of the story, but they were put through hell as well. And their story, I feel, needs to be told too. So I wanted to write their stories first rather than make them an appendix. And it's only a short book. It's a short story, well, for me anyway. I don't write short, really. And it is the story of Janet Preston's second child, because I wanted to keep as close to the known facts as possible and not make up too much about her. So it starts when she arrives at York Castle for the second time into that dungeon. And it looks at her time there, what happens, the torture, the despair, and then the trial and the aftermath of the trial. So it's very much sticking to, as far as we know, the true facts, or at least the most. There are different, because it's so long ago and there's few records. There's some of it we have to interpolate, and I've gone for the most plausible reasons, which we've discussed today here, really. And it is very much her imprisonment, her incarceration, and then the trial. And she is helpless throughout it all, because how do you argue against all of that, especially when you're barely allowed to talk? In there. But it tells a story of Thomas Lister and the death of his father, and how all came to pass and what she was accused of. So I
And I
have to
think,
say, it's not a light read. So if you like
no,
a nice cozy read with a happy ending, it isn't
I
for
know
you.
Shelley and me, we've both
Yeah.
read this, haven't we?
Wonderful.
We both read this, and I definitely would recommend it. Where could anybody get
Thank
it
you.
from, Karen, if they wanted a copy? Where's the best place? The
Um,
best place for
it's
you
most
for them
place.
to get it
It's
from?
well, actually, from my website, which is www.karenperkinsauthor.com, and you can get signed copies from there with free UK postage, and you can also get the ebooks from there as well for both Kindle and EPUB. And
Okay.
also the audiobook is available there as well, which is narrated by myself, which I thoroughly enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
don't
yes,
forget, we've also Divided by Witchcraft, which is based on the
Yes.
Salisbury witches as well.
Yes, that's the that one as well, which is the Salisbury Witches. So both of them. It's also
And the-
available on Amazon and Audible and Kobo. Look, most places, and even your independent local bookshops are able to order the paperback in for you. So yeah, so widely available, and I do hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure we can post a link somewhere, can't we, Scott?
Yes.
I'm sure we can post a link somewhere for Karen's books.
Thank
The
you.
good thing about the books is it's like coming from the actual person.
Yes.
And so you get gripped for the minute you start reading them. So
Wonderful.
whoever wants to buy these books, be prepared to set aside the time, because once you start, you can't not stop.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll post all the links and details how to get a hold of Karen's books, etc., on Facebook and Instagram, and we can do it on Twitter as well, can't we? We can put it on Twitter.
Wonderful.
We'll post it everywhere we can. Everywhere we can.
All over the place. Thanks, this lovely lady. We're all over the place. All over the place.
Yay.
Yeah, do that, lady.
Yeah. So just to kind of wind up on the Janet Preston side.
Yeah.
Even though she wasn't in Lancaster, she was held in York. Conditions still there were pretty much almost identical as to that
if not
in
worse.
Lancaster.
If not worse.
Okay.
It's been very. We don't know for sure where the dungeon was, or I think I've pinpointed it in that it was in a tower that no longer exists, that bordered the River Foss. So it was known for flooding. If it was from the river, I mean, everything went into the river, so it would have flooded with effluent from the town, or from the city, should I say, as well as from the dungeon itself, and it would have been packed full of people. So it would have been absolutely horrendous. Very cold.
And then very similar. She was kind of the moment that the door opened and she was given some kind of what she probably thought in her head might have been a salvation, because she'd done it once already. She'd got herself admitted once already. So might have seen this door opening of offering salvation to her. Her mind frame would have been totally different. Because
she wouldn't even have known exactly what she was charged with until she got into the court.
Say that. Yeah. Just about, and in our kind of our Pendle special part 2, we really go into depth as to who was tried for what was offered to them, what wasn't offered to them, and the conditions that they were kept in. So she becomes, when people start to tell the forgotten Pendle, or the Pendle story, I find that Jeanette Preston becomes almost forgotten in that tale. I know that myself, when I've taken the tours, the only time that she really comes into the story is when we say who was at Melkin Tower.
Yes.
And she's forgotten, she's not mentioned. So I think things like the discussion that we've had today is really important, because it highlights that she was a woman. She was in her mid-40s. She, probably a close age to a lot of them, apart from our 2 older ones and the younger ones. They were all kind of around the same age. Elizabeth Device, Alice Nutter, Janet Preston, Jane Bulcock. They were all around that kind of age.
Yes. So they're what we'd call today the prime of life. Back then, maybe not quite the prime of life, but still, they had lives, they had families, they had futures.
All ripped away in superstition and paranoia.
And they have no power And the difference in wealth, living conditions was extreme, but the difference in power was even more so. They were completely at the mercy of the magistrates and the lords, and they could do nothing about it.
No, nothing at all.
Do we know where her remains were placed? Do you know what happened to them after?
No, no. Well, it would have been, I think there's a legend that she's buried in, I think in Gisborne. There's supposed to be a grave in the graveyard there, but it wouldn't have gone there. It wouldn't have been on consecrated ground, and I think that grave is too new as well. So she would have been buried in York. But as I'm doing my research, looking through the judgments, many people who were hung were then given to the surgeons at the City of York for dissection and anatomization. And I think that's her most likely fate, I'm afraid. And then her remains would have just been chucked on a heap somewhere.
I'm sure our friend Thomas Broad and the Pendle Witch blog may be able to shed a little more light
Yes.
on that. So if you're with us, Tom, we would love to hear your research, or your very factual research, because everything you do is so factual. You're amazing. To kind of to drop it, post it on our page, or even in the comments here, as to what you have found to where Janet Preston's body lies to rest, if it lies anywhere. That is. Well, I think we've kind of I think we've, in a way, just like the rest of them, we try and say as much as we can in a short space of time to give you a snippet into the way of life. Whether she was as poor as Chattox and Demdike, I'm not so sure, because I get the impression she might have been quite well looked after.
Yeah.
Yes, I do as well.
So maybe she was kind of, if we look at maybe the three classes to make it simpler. So we have Demdike and Chattox, kind of the low class, and then we have maybe Janet Preston sitting middle somewhere, and Alice on the top, as in a class ladder.
Yes.
So it affected people from all classes. I suppose is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. If you crossed the wrong person, you were in trouble, especially if you were female.
Money couldn't save you. Money couldn't save you, as it's shown. Well, thank you very much, ladies. And I know that are we back next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday, yes, for the Samsbury Witches.
This is a spooky, slightly more spookier. I find this tale to be slightly more spookier. And it's a bit disturbing, more than
very disturbing,
now, or a man, as sad as it is, a man on his deathbed. But it's an eerie one. It's an eerie one. So thank you very much, ladies, and
thank you.
Thank everybody for watching. Yeah, and we'll see you. We'll see you before, but if not, we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Yes.
Thank you, ladies. Again, always actually just to sit and listen to you chatter, and always fascinating. So that's it. So we'll be back. Ladies will be back next week, as it says, the same time. We're back on tonight at 9 o'clock with Mr. City of the Dead Tours again, Jamie Kistorfin. This time I'm getting a chance to talk to him. Last time I missed out because I wasn't in the best of health. I was fighting death, shall we say. This time, twice in 1 week, I fought off the Reaper. I'm quite proud of that. Thank you very much for that, Joe. Sympathy. You never ever get sympathy, do you? Just what I'm going to say.
Never.
You never get the sympathy. It's actually, I'm shocked. But maybe Jamie will give me some sympathy. That's it. He's a man. You understand.
I don't think he will, to be fair.
Well, the clock's ticking, Shelley. We shall find out tonight. I'll give the sock story first and see the response I get. You know what I mean? We'll wait and see. So hopefully he's enjoying it. I know he's probably did enjoy it. And hopefully we'll see tonight 9 o'clock with Jamie Kistorfin. Who's Kistorfin? Kistorfin.
It's bad enough that I spelled his name.
I'm live out.
It's not even a place. Brilliant. 9 o'clock tonight, Jamie Christopher, City Dead Tours. We're going to have another wee chat with them, and we'll be talking about City Dead Tours and some about Darkest Mile, which is coming up as soon as we are set free.
Yeah.
So we'll see you then. Thanks very much, folks. Have a good day.
Thank you.
And,
Bye.
stay safe.